This is Michael Shanti. My special guest is Joshua Ham. And we're going to talk tonight about raising awareness and the awakening of consciousness and how it manifests and what we can do and what that really means. And first, we'll like to welcome you, Joshua, for being here.
Hi, thanks. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Tell us, our listeners, a little bit about your background in this topic and give us a little insight into who you are.
Okay. Thanks for having me on the show, by the way.
My pleasure.
My name's Joshua Ham, and I have been a researcher for a very long time. I just finished a psychology degree, so I'm still kind of a new guy. I've written some articles, sometimes for free, sometimes under my name, Joshua Ham. I wrote one for Vision magazine about human potential, and I've really just been writing a lot more. I'm writing a couple books. I don't quite know the names of what I want to use for them yet, so I won't reveal that yet. But this has been an ongoing interest of mine for a really long time, and I feel like I've gotten to a point where I'm comfortable in my knowledge base, and I love to communicate with others and share what my perspective is on all this, and I hope to be able to help you guys in your own pursuit and journey of also raising consciousness.
Yeah, thank you. It is a very personal thing, this whole idea of raising awareness and the consciousness awakening, which I'm seeing happening on a global scale.
Exactly.
It really seems like there's a major tide in this regard. Mm-hmm. And so talk a little bit about some of the actions that have really facilitated this new awareness that we're seeing on a lot of these really relevant issues of our time, and how that's playing out. What are people doing that's actually really effectively making this change in consciousness through raising awareness?
Right. Well, I'd say one of the most immediate things that comes to mind is the popularity of the internet, the ability to share information at the click of a button. And yes, you do have to check your sources and research further if you want to confirm some of the things. There's a lot of memes out there that don't have accurate information, for example. But that in itself, I've seen in the last 5 years alone a huge growing awareness of, from politics to GMOs to food to consciousness to different ways of thinking that have definitely exponentially grown. You've seen Monsanto getting banned from many different countries. You've seen changes in politics and government. The minimum wage has been raised on a federal level. And you see a lot of food companies, and supermarkets and things like that changing their way of selling products and food, where areas before, most people that I knew at least would just buy things. I mean, I remember the first time I walked into a Vons, and I realized, or any major chain,
right? And
I realized that I wasn't checking the ingredients and how many things were in there that probably your body had no use for. That was a mind blowing moment. That was about 10 years ago. But I see a lot more awareness growing. I have a lot of personal friends, for example, that 3 years ago didn't know anything about any of these kind of things. And now they're going as healthy as possible. They're all about what they put in their body and what they read. Now they're educating themselves constantly. They're more aware. They're not just listening to one source. They're going to many sources. And I really do feel that even though they say, or at least a lot of people say, that the internet isn't the most credible source, I feel you have so many options to explore that people, and like you said, it's an individual path, people can go and at their own pace increase their awareness and their consciousness of everything that's going on and make up their own mind about it, And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And on the actions that are raising awareness, what are some of the actions that you've seen in the last few years on a on a societal scale that have really started this sort of chain of events of this new awareness and this awakening of conscious?
Right. For example, there's Occupy movement, which brought a huge amount of awareness. They're all over the country. That even though in some cases the media didn't air a lot of different protests around the world, there's many going on all over the world. I mean, we're talking about thousands, sometimes way more than that, in the streets for days at a time, and it's literally all over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so do you think there's really a benefit for people to get out there in the streets and wave their banners and raise their voices?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's always been an effective tool, and maybe in our day and time, people, I hear, oh, this generation's a lot more apathetic, and one of the, criticisms I always hear is, oh, those people just don't have a job and and I definitely disagree with that, and I think that it's made a huge difference in awareness and impact in terms of information. A lot of good people, intelligent people have organized websites and newsletters and all sorts of things where they can bring credible information forward and also bring it out to the public. There's always going to be criticisms of people who do that, just as there was in the 60s. But regardless, it makes a statement and it makes people think. So I definitely, I think there's a benefit to it, yes.
Right. And that point you brought of making people think, that's where we start getting into the other half of the coin, which is this awakening of consciousness we're seeing. And give us a little bit about the actual mechanics, how your thought process starts to change with this consciousness, and tell us a little bit about how that happens.
Well, for me, for my example, and I've seen this in many people, but I'll start kind of with myself a little bit, and it really does begin with a thought, and I started to really, I talk to a lot of people, and they're like, oh, well, you can't change anything, that's just the way things are, or what's one person going to do? We're always thinking on a physical level of literal action, but anything anyone does or becomes begins with a thought or even a belief system. So I find that when this awareness begins to increase, or when people at least open themselves up to alternative viewpoints, or at least explore them, Aristotle, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't think this is the exact quote, but he said it's the mark of a wise man to be able to entertain an idea without necessarily just believing it. And I think that's a great start for anybody to begin to expand their minds a little bit out of the status quo or the accepted paradigms. I think a lot of people, as I was at a certain point for sure, I was afraid of what my peers would think, my parents, and exploring subjects. A lot of them have connotations or stereotypes about it. And it's very easy to clump anybody into that. For example, the word conspiracy theorist or hippies. It's like caring about the planet makes you this tree hugger or whatever. But really, it's about transcending those limitations and the categorizations and the dogmas about it, and educating yourself and going on your own journey of awareness. And I've been seeing that a lot of, especially because now we're globally connected, non-linearly, we have the internet, we have a lot of different things and modes of teaching ourselves and learning. I'm seeing a lot of communication. For example, I have seen people who may have just had a just pique their interest in something, get on an online forum, and they might be communicating with all sorts of people from all over the world who have different expertises or opinions. And yes, you see arguments and all that, but you also see a lot of learning and mutual correspondence. And even now, the different kinds of news and medias and outlets of information have also increased. There's a lot of talk, and I know in scientifically academic science, it's hard to prove that, one person can impact another on a huge distance, or that there's some, thousandth monkey effect, so to speak. But it's definitely not something uncommon. There's always been, pioneers or just people who have something new or who wanted to teach something, and within a period of time, a group of people adopt it, And I would say the most beneficial way of that happening for us as a species or even as a country is always evolving. And this is more metaphorical, but I once I referenced a belief system, for example, as a kind of vessel. You could think of it as a vessel, as a ship, or any kind of vessel. And we kind of begin to evolve our vessels to match where we're at the time. For example, when we first wanted to, sail across, from one continent to the other, or now space travel, you have to come up with a different vessel to different vessel of knowledge, let's say, scientifically or spiritually, mentally, whatever it is. And I feel like we're also at a point where we're going to have to start developing a new vessels of understanding or knowledge in order to overcome a lot of our hurdles and our issues. And I think this kind of education should be almost not standardized, but almost more commonplace. For example, I don't remember being in public school when I was a kid, or preschool, or even further in high school. There was a little bit of mention about the world problems, but there wasn't really an emphasis on it. So even in high school, I was already thinking, well, I feel like I'm being educated more so I can be a productive worker, as opposed to someone that's really going to make an impact on fixing our really communal problem. I mean, it's really a problem for all of us,
Right. So from your perspective, as like you said, you've been studying psychology, you've gotten your degree, you're developing papers and things.
Yes.
At what point, for example, as an age group, do you think would be the proper time to start, grooming this idea of consciousness beyond just the ability to handle a tool,
right,
or to calculate a math problem?
Right. That's a tough question, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of people with different opinions, and some of them would be controversial. But I believe at the moment people begin becoming interested in learning about anything, about the world, and that starts at a very young age. I believe that critical thinking should always be something that is taught. That's I'm not saying it's a missing component, but I feel, at least, with a lot of my peers and me myself growing up, that a lot of things that I was, for example, taught in the education system were almost heralded as like facts, that this is just how it is. And I didn't really see a lot of encouragement for questioning of those facts, or thinking in alternative ways that lead to creative solutions. And one of the things that really helped me, at least personally, was I was educated in a Montessori system. So there are many different ways to solve problems for all different kinds of people, because not everyone processes information in the same way. So I believe at a pretty young age, I'm not going to say, like, because when you're very young, a lot of it is up to the parents as well, and sometimes parents do not feel comfortable with an education system telling them, what to believe, and, there's a lot of different religious beliefs and a lot of political beliefs. But I do believe that, education, and I would encourage parents to begin to, at a young age, to groom their children to think critically, make beliefs on their own, and to grow, to educate themselves.
Right, raising an awareness
Yes.
that there's a larger community
Yes.
than just mom and dad
Exactly.
in the house, and there's a little bit of that happens organically.
Yes.
Kids start first their little peers, and then and I have a child in grade school, so I do see a lot of this firsthand.
Right.
And I see a lot of this homogenized type of, every child is instructed essentially exactly the same, rather than which I guess the Montessori system is more where they groom to fit the attributes of the child.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of economic issues involved in that, as well.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't really see, a focus in the education system on this idea of raising the awareness of children into, to being conscious beings. They seems to me like they're raising them to be functional beings.
Right.
And my experience, now I don't have a psychological degree, but my experience seems to be that really at a pretty young age, kids are able to digest,
Yes.
assimilate that kind of a concept
Right.
of, what you're doing impacts the larger sphere around you.
Absolutely. I had my mother was a teacher for a very long time, and she always told me of the impact it had on her children and how lives can change at a very young age, from parents, but also from the mentors and teachers that kind of facilitate that, and understand that. And everybody has gone through school, or high school or anything, where they've had one of the best teacher, always open mind, they stimulated and they were, very, people really enjoy it. And then you hear of, teachers who are the complete opposite, very, rigid, standardized, and maybe different methods work for different people. But I definitely see, and we're talking about conscious awareness and how it's growing, I see this happening a lot more. And even though we still specialize and we get degrees and we go our own way, really a lot of people could teach themselves all sorts of things now. You can literally download text. Obviously, you pay for it. Some people, I'm sure, circumvent their way.
They have ways.
Yeah, they have ways. Just as there is for anything. But you can teach yourself quite a bit, and you can learn quite a bit. Maybe you won't become an expert in the field and have hands-on experience, but that doesn't mean you can't. For example, I'm psychology, but I love physics, and I love all other kinds of sciences, and I love educating myself and learning things, and not just from standardized textbooks, but I love even alternate theories, and I love reading that.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I would love more in the education system is more alternate forms of theories that were very popular, or maybe they weren't, but might have merit or value, that for some reason or another just never really took off or became accepted in academia. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other people who have done that. And for example, there's Nikola Tesla, which is becoming, thanks to the internet and this conscious awareness, become a very popular person, a very popular subject, whereas before he was very obscure. And we wouldn't have AC/DC or a lot of the technologies that we use today, from wireless transmission to radio waves, X-rays, all sorts of different things, if it was not for him.
Right. So you think about when you're in the coffee shop on your laptop on Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
There's the guy to thank for.
Exactly.
He's basically ascended to rock star status almost nowadays.
Yeah.
Although he still seems to be completely omitted from history books.
I've never seen him in any textbook growing up, personally, and maybe now they're doing it. I'm not sure. That would be something actually really interesting to learn. But yeah, he had a lot of different ideas about energy that very contradicts the current model, or the standard model, I guess we could call it. And I'm not going to say he was right or they're wrong or whatever, but it would be nice to see people recreate these things, and if there are limitations in their current, let's say, model, to see if there's a way to understand the limitation in a way where it can happen. For example, right now there's the speed of light, and all these different, the main theory, relativity, and Tesla, according to him, he was able to transmit signals from one end of the world to the other faster than the speed of light, and that instantly, to a lot of people who are educated in the standard model of physics, is an impossibility. So there's a lot of dismissal, and his ideas were also very different from relativity. This is, I'm not criticizing Einstein or anything, because I think he was amazing. I think he contributed such a great.
He deserves the label genius.
Yeah, he did a great contribution to humanity. He's definitely a genius and also a humanist, and was very kind of open-minded, aware, spiritual person himself. He was very outspoken about violence, and one of my favorite. I'm paraphrasing again, but he said you can't solve a problem in the world with the same thinking that created it, and I think that relates back to what I was saying about vessels. And he died trying to find kind of a unified model. For we know about gravity and light, but we don't know about electromagnetism and how it links together. But Tesla said, in a couple of his speeches, especially before his death, that he had a model that was completely different from relativity that would explain it all. But we never got to see the light of day. None of us, there isn't a paper somewhere where we can go and find it and, or download and see it,
Yeah. Although it seems others have been moving in that direction.
Yes.
So, real briefly, for anybody who might have just joined us, I'm Michael Shanti. I'm here with Joshua Ham. This is Radio Occupy on KCSB. We thank you for stopping by and listening in. And we're talking about the raising awareness and awakening of consciousness. And I know that you have a lot of technical understanding of this process.
Right.
So, but without getting too technical,
Right.
Share with us a little bit about how consciousness impacts your environment.
Yes, absolutely. Currently, right now, there's a lot of books and movies, and they're starting to talk about this, And for a lot of people, it's made a great impact in their lives. For example, changing the way you think, changing the way you interact with others. And one interesting thing is, on a purely, logical level, obviously changing the way you think, being positive, makes you behave differently, makes you act differently, and makes you interact with people differently. So that in itself, logically, will obviously improve your life. But, there's also discussions of people being able to influence, for example, a random number generator, which is, I think they use binary, and of the probability of the one that was intended to come up more than if it was just randomly done when a person was involved. There's a lot of different ideas about this. Currently, there is some research being done on, for example, human beings, they emit light out of their bodies. They emit biophotons. And we don't quite fully understand this yet in the standard model. But I think about what that means. And I think it is interesting that we're trying to build quantum computers, for example, that use entangled photons or, light in different ways and try to carry information across distances of obviously instantaneously or at a much more efficient rate than any kind of computer we currently have. And we always talk about the human brain as a computer, for example, and it's very controversial to talk about the human brain at a quantum level. There's a controversial theory on the quantum brain, for example. But as a psychologist, I find very interesting their studies on what they call parapsychology. There's kind of a theme about it that is always a little, almost like a stereotype of a little kookiness, But we're always just looking in the brain, and we're always looking for hard physical evidence. But I see science now moving into a kind of less linear way of, we always kind of thought about Newtonian or relativity, what's observable, and, you throw a ball down a street and we can predict that. But in terms of quantum physics, things are chaotic, they're very hard to understand on a logical.
It's a very fluid
fluid, yeah. Things are in superposition sometimes, which could be in all possible states at once. Is it a wave or is it a particle? And I think as we move towards understanding this non-linear aspect of literal physical reality, we're also going to understand more about the role consciousness plays. And we can't yet prove that someone thinking about something can influence matter, for example, but we can say that the act of observation definitely influences matter. The double slit experiment. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you the name of the experiment where it's like, the atom doesn't really exist until the observer sees it.
Exactly. Yeah, the electron. They say it collapses wave function when there's no observer in the room. It moves in a wave. It literally has a wave-like pattern, even though it was just one. But when someone's there, it behaves exactly as you expect it to behave in classical physics. So that was a huge confusion, and there's some work being done now, because they say this is a micro level, this is a quantum level, right? We've never seen objects that we can see with our eyes behave in a quantum way. But and unfortunately, I don't remember all the details, but they've done a recent experiments where water droplets on vibrating plates that you can actually see You might have to get a microscope, get closer, but you can see that they're physically there, and they behave in quantum-like ways.
What's the? It was I believe a Japanese researcher who was doing the water study.
Yes.
And let's talk a little bit about that. Where
Sure.
it was this conscious intent.
Sure.
And what happened in that experiment?
Sure. I find it very interesting, and unfortunately, like I said, in the standard model, a lot of people criticize his ways of research and getting information. But if you look past that and you really look into what he did, he just recently passed away, Dr. Emoto, rest in peace. I think what he did was fascinating. We know that frozen water has, like, for example, snowflakes. Natural snowflakes have incredible, beautiful symmetry. There's a way that everything, all the elements of the water organize themselves to become geometrically perfect, basically. And what was interesting is Dr. Emoto's experiments, and he did it with different things. His most famous ones were with water, and he had people directing positive intent, one way, and the negative intent another way, anger and these kind of things. And the water appeared, if it was in a negative intent, it was disfigured and not anything coherent or symmetrical. Or areas, if they used positive intentions or loving intentions, or didn't have a disharmonious emotion, the water itself almost mirrored that harmony. And I would say we technically can't explain that, in terms of physics, right? But I think there's definitely evidence that intention and thought process can influence, the things, for example, we're made up of, which is water. I definitely, I find that fascinating personally, because there's, besides freezing water, there's also, for example, the cymatic experiments where people, they have a metal plate and they pulse a sound through it. There's a vibration, and the matter on top of it, they usually use sand as an example, arranges itself and moves itself in a perfect geometrical symmetry without any instructions or programming or anything. Mm-hmm. It's literally the frequency that's being pulsed through the plate that creates this perfect geometry. And the higher the frequency, the more complex and ordered it becomes.
That was the point I was just about to bring out. That very low frequencies are very simplistic patterns. I've seen some of these experiments, and until they can get extremely complex on the higher frequencies.
Right.
So now, in relation to that, mm-hmm. and as to consciousness, how does consciousness and that type of low or high frequency, mm-hmm. what's the correlation there?
I believe, and for example, this is an example when people have a lot of stress, people are in a negative state of mind, it impacts the body. For example, in psychology, it's well known, there's a placebo effect. It's a well-known thing, and yet it's almost said in a way where it's like, oh, it's just a placebo effect. But we don't really fully understand how a thought can literally, and we're getting there, but how a thought can literally do something that would seem impossible, cure something that normally you would need a real drug for, and it's just a sugar pill. So I think in terms of consciousness, I think having a positive disposition, a more harmonious sense of physicality, less anxiety, less fear, literally has less tension in my body. I think I feel like it affects my body in a positive way. I feel more energized. And if there is a kind of symmetry in the water in your cells, there's talk of, there's a researcher named Mei Wan Ho who is a geneticist, but she's looking a lot into how human body cells align themselves a lot like crystals do, and that the dipoles of each cells, they align, and we're not sure yet if it's when they meditate or when you're relaxed or when you're not, but an assumption of mine would be that your body and the whole energy, and I'm not just talking about molecules and cells, but like electricity, for example, flows better. And when it comes to the people around you, whether it's a heart math people who are doing tests on the electromagnetic field of the heart, for example, and how it extends beyond the body, and how does that really impact another person around one another. And somehow we know, for example, when one person has an idea in one part of the world, there might be someone else at the other end of the world who doesn't even know this person who's also studying the same thing.
In fact, Nobel Prizes have been awarded to people exactly like that on two separate ends of the world doing the same research, virtually unaware of each other, and all of a sudden they come to these conclusions.
Exactly. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm Michael Shanti. I'm with Joshua Ham. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with some more of this conversation.